let's get started with Advanced MS Word. For those of you who are taking this class for the first time, everyone's taking it for the first time, but if you haven't taken any of the previous MS Word classes, these are the links to the intro and the intermediate classes we've done over the past month. They're not a requirement to take this class because everyone has a different comfort level with Word, but if you're interested in looking at those workshops, the links will be included in the follow-up material that I sent. So just one quick word about what advanced means in the context of Microsoft Word. I did see in the chat someone said, welcome fans of MS Word. I love that because I am a fan of MS Word. I've been teaching Word for about 20 years. I'm a Microsoft certified Office specialist in Microsoft Word. Doesn't mean I know everything about it. There's lots to learn for everybody. There's new versions coming out every couple of years. I didn't learn everything there was about Word 2000. It's amazing what's there. So in the context of this class, what advanced means is pretty much the top level of what employers could reasonably expect you to know going into a position. You may never use all of what we're going to be talking about today. You may use more, but most employers are very comfortable with someone who knows up to what we're going to talk about today. And the way I know that is I've surveyed hundreds of employers asking them, when you ask for Word and Excel a must, what does that mean in both of these programs? And the thing that they came up over and over again were these three things. If they can do tables, if they can do custom tabs, and especially if they can do mail merge. A lot of employers see that as a more advanced skill that saves them a lot of time and money. So we'll talk about these three things. If you have additional questions, though, we will get to them as time permits. This seminar will be a combination of a PowerPoint presentation and live demonstrations with a Word document. So we're going to start with tables, and we'll work our way to mail merge. Before we get on to tables, I'm going to explain a little bit about where you might interact with tables. You may not choose to use tables. You may choose to use custom tabs, or you may choose to use neither. It's still important to understand what happens with both of those formats. And here's an example. Many of the templates you get today, if you create a resume online or you download a template from Microsoft Word itself, are going to be structured in something called the table format. So here's an example I took right off of Microsoft's account. In this case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tables embedded into this document. Tables are very easy to enter information into. They are a little bit more difficult to edit information like moving things around, copying and pasting things from one section to another. So the way you generally know they're in the tables format is you will either see solid lines or, in this case, dimmed lines. You might not even see those, but this is the table format. I'll explain how to create that, and then also how to back out that format, to take it out of the table format and to put a table into a more easily editable tabbed version of the document. So first off, tables. How to insert a table is pretty straightforward. All you do is you go to, like the title says here, Insert. I'm going to go to Insert on the ribbon, click on the Insert tab, and then there's a grouping called the Tables grouping. This is second from the far left. I'll click on Tables. And then what you're going to get is a grid pattern of columns and rows. The columns would be vertical, the rows would be horizontal. And if you hover over any area here, if this were a live Word document, it would start selecting up to the point in which I click. So if I were to go, let's say 4 by 3, I'll get something similar to this. I'd also get a peek view over here of what that would look like on my document. In previous versions of Word, you were able to click and drag from the bottom right to make it much bigger. That's not really necessary. In fact, it's not even important that you know how many rows you need for a table. It's a good idea to at least anticipate how many columns you will need. Now I'm going to demonstrate this in a live session here, and if someone, Gloria, if you could just pipe in, are you seeing my Word screen?
Yes, I am. It looks like a blank Word right now. Is that correct?
Okay. Yeah, sometimes it comes out gray, and I don't want anyone to be looking at me talking about a gray screen for 5 minutes here. So what I had just done was I clicked on Insert, Tables, and I put a 3 by 3 table up there. So these are columns and these are rows. To select an entire column, you'd put your pointer at the top of that column and you'll get a black arrow, and you can select an entire column. If you want to select an entire row, you do it to the left of that. In the chat box, if someone could tell me, what does this remind you of? Columns, rows, and this might be a little telling, but the intersection of columns and rows are cells. Ah, there we go. Someone's very quick with that. Yeah, it's kind of like Word's version of Excel. You can even do calculations within this. However, I'm going to caution you, it's not a very good spreadsheet. In fact, it's very seldom used as a spreadsheet, although it could be. If you have Excel installed on your computer, there's a really nice option to use instead. And that is, you go to Insert, Tables, but instead of creating a table, you create an Excel spreadsheet. It's one of the options right within that Insert Table. And now what it's going to do is it's going to actually put Excel inside of Word. And what you'll notice here is the tabs are now all Excel tabs, even though we're in Microsoft Word. It creates what's called an object. A table is an object, an embedded Excel spreadsheet is an object, a picture would be an object, meaning that when you click on it, you go like to a different level or a different overlay of your document. And when you click off it, notice what happens to these tabs. It kind of closes out of Excel and you're right back into Word. So I'm going to back out of that basically. We're not going to work with an Excel document. I want to work specifically with tables, but you can. And when you should is when you want to perform calculations or there's some ability maybe to use the fill handle effectively. Tables work, but Excel is always going to be better for strict data. So I'm going to put that back in here, this 3x3 table. And there's a couple of other points I want to make here. This right here is your anchor, and that it anchors to a paragraph. So if I had, let's say, a bunch of text, I could grab this anchor and move it to be anchored to a different paragraph. Let's do that real quick. So I'm going to create a 4-paragraph document. And I'm going to, just so we can follow what's happening here, I'm going to turn this text red. And then I'm going to insert a table right here. If I grab this anchor, I can anchor it to the paragraph below. It's like cutting and pasting a table. This option right down here is kind of like how you increase or decrease the size of a picture. It's an editing point. And so I can increase it horizontally and vertically. I can change how things wrap around it. And that's one thing to keep in mind that's different with Excel, or excuse me, with tables, is you have both a horizontal and a vertical, not only in the columns and rows, but within the cell itself. So I have this as a top left alignment. I could make it center center, bottom right, top right, any of, I think, 9 different options. How I would get to that is through these right here. When you click on an object, whether it be an Excel document, embedded in Word, table, a picture, you often get what are called contextual tabs. It's a very fancy term. It just means you're going to get extra options. In tables, because they're kind of a world all by themselves, you get 2. You get the Design tab, which is just a copy of what you're seeing up here. And this would help you with jumping into a table style, a nicely formatted table style, and putting options like a total row or banded columns or all sorts of different things. There's endless amounts of things you can play around with. And then there's the Layout tab. A Layout tab has tons of options. There's where you could embed like a simple formula to calculate the total of a column. This is where you would slice and dice your columns and rows up by inserting columns, inserting rows below. Again, it's very simple to add a row in Excel. It's a little bit more difficult to add a column, but not much. So going back to my Word document here, if I wanted to add an extra row below what you see here, all I would have to do is hit the Tab key, because Tab key in tables brings you from cell to cell, just like it would in Excel. So it just brings me to the last cell in this column. If I hit tab again, it brings me to the next row, first column. But if I go all the way to the end, it creates another row. So it really doesn't matter how many rows you initially insert, you can always add more. I don't want to get too far along, Glory, before we stop to see if there are any questions.
Yes, I did have one question, but I'm not 100% sure what Kathy is referring to. She just said, can you do that again? I don't believe she means the whole thing, but
Okay.
maybe she can write in the chat a little clearer. And then I do have one other question. It says, how do you erase a border between the cells?
Oh, sure. Okay, first off, and I apologize if I click too fast, I've got to watch that because there's a little bit of lag with WebEx between what I do and what you see. Oh, how do you turn that to an Excel spreadsheet? That's what she was asking. Okay, first let's look at the erasing of cell borders. So that is an option on the Layout tab, and if I can try to get this to, I've got a bar that you don't see that's kind of showing here. Okay, so I'm going to click on this. And this, by the way, if I click out of this, watch what happens to my, tabs. Okay, you see the tabs here are nothing, and that's because my insertion point is right here. As soon as I click within this table, I now get the contextual tabs. So to erase a border, all I have to do, if I can get this to show up again here, I'm going to bring this down just a little bit. Okay. I would go to the Layout tab, and I would click on Eraser. And then I would just click. Now, the little point of the eraser is where it's going to happen. So I could click this, and now that creates a cell up here, like a title cell, basically. That does make it more difficult to select things, so be careful when you do that. But there's all sorts of ways you can erase borders on cells. To Kathy's question, what you do to insert an Excel document into your Word document is you go to Insert, and on Table, on the very bottom, second from the bottom, there is Excel Spreadsheet. So if you click on that, what it's going to do, wherever your insertion point is, it's going to, it takes a little bit of time because it's opening up Excel basically within your document, and there you have a Excel file, really, or workbook that has all of the tools and all of the toolbars that you would have if you opened Excel itself. Okay. I hope that answers the question. I'll take one more here.
Okay, there's one more that says, could you change the color or your cursor to black? Higher contrast would be better to track.
Yeah, I can't right within what we're doing right now, but that's a good point. Well taken, thank you. I will keep that in mind. So let's go back to the PowerPoint, and now we're going to talk about many of the times when we have a table, we don't intend for people to see the grid lines. They're just there to as placeholders for us to understand where we are in the document. We don't necessarily want them to print. They will print if you insert them yourself pretty much every time. To change that, all you would need to do is click and drag over all of the cells you don't want to have a printable border. So in this case, I'm just going to click and drag over the top of the columns. I select all of the cells that way, and then I go to the Design tab, the Borders dropdown, and I choose No Border. What this is going to do is erase the borders from a printable standpoint. They're still here. They're still kind of like what I call a dimmed example or a delimited line, or however you want to think about it, with one exception. Okay, this is a tricky thing. If anyone remembers from the previous workshops we've done, I talked a lot about something called the show hide. I will talk about that again actually when we get to custom tabs. Show hide shows or hides non-printing information. So in this case, these borders are non-printing information. They're still valuable though, because if they're not there, I may not know this is the second row, third column. If it was just blank, it would still be there, I just wouldn't see it. There are advantages to that. One advantage is if you're going to give a presentation or someone's looking at your resume, you might not necessarily want them to see the borders. If you have control over the presentation, you can do that. However, the show hide, and in this case, what we're going to call the view grid lines or not view grid lines, is really on whoever opens the document. It's a program-specific format. It is not a document-specific format. And I know that might sound a little confusing. The idea here is you don't know if theirs is turned on or turned off. Just because you turned yours off when you save the document doesn't mean it's turned off on their end. But I'll show you how you get to it. You click on the Layout tab, and then you go to the Tables grouping, and you click on View Grid Lines. What that'll do is it'll either turn it on or off. In this case, I turned it off. Notice that because I'm still in the table, I still have my anchor, I still have my resizing tool, but I don't see any of the grid lines. Now, if you did truly want to have a resume in a table format and you wanted to make sure they didn't see those grid lines for whatever reason, you could just save it as a PDF. We talked about that in previous classes, and they wouldn't see the grid lines then because they're non-printing. All right.
Art, I'd like to ask one more question before you go on. There was a person that wanted to know, how do you add a column, keeping the first two columns the existing size?
Okay, so I will bring over a Word document again. So if I'm reading this right, if I just had something like this, and I wanted to insert a column, I wanted to keep these two the same, what I could do is I could go to Layout and Insert to the right. And in that case, what it's going to do is auto resize them. There's a lot of different things you can do. You could bump them back over to get them. I'm sure there's a setting in which you could make it work automatically with maybe holding a control key or something like that. But you can always resize them to whatever size they were initially. So taking a look at this, if I back this out, back it up one more time here, I would just look at the size of them. So in this case, let's say they were 1 inch. I would just make a note of that, and then I would resize them back to that 1 inch. Now that's probably much harder than it had to be. That's just one option you could do. Be aware though, take a look at this, as long as we're here. When you click in a cell, each cell has its own indent, left indent, and right indent. They don't show up in the other columns until you click on them. You can set indents per cell. You can set custom tabs, which we're going to be talking about a little bit, per cell. Think of this information here, this cell, as its own little document almost. And if I hit enter within this, it increases the size of the cell. And I can do all sorts of things. Now, should you do all sorts of things within a cell? Probably not. You're going to mess things up if you have wildly different formats in each cell, but that option is there. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is converting a table to text. I do use this quite a bit because a lot of times when someone comes into a career force location and they get a resume off of a website, Minnesota Works, or off of some resume builder or whatever, it'll look fine until they try to change it. Once they try to change it, it goes all over the place because it was in a table format, and table formats are not super easy to adjust. So one thing you might try is doing something called converting your table to text. So all you need to do is click on the Layout tab, and you don't even have to necessarily select anything here. It's all or nothing. So you're not converting one cell in a table into text. You're converting the entire table. So on the Layout tab, I click on Convert to Text. Once you click on that, you'll get a little dialog box that pops up that asks you, what do you want to replace those cells with? In most cases, you want to use tabs, especially for like a resume. If you were working with a bunch of data and you wanted to transfer it over to an Excel or something like that, you might use a comma or a semicolon. But in most cases, especially for text-heavy stuff, you're going to use tabs. Once you click OK, it looks, for all the world, like we have hidden the grid lines and we still have a table. But in fact, we have something else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on my show hide. And by the way, the one way I know I'm not in a table anymore is I've selected all this information and I don't have the table tabs, the situational table tabs up there anymore. What I do have is two things. I have a tab mark. This is the non-printing character for hitting the physical tab key. And I have something on my ruler called a custom tab. Before we move on to custom tabs and default tabs, are there any questions we need to get to on tables, Glory?
Yes. Let's see here. Can you insert a spreadsheet on your own into the new document?
So you mean other than how I just did it?
I don't know that for sure.
Okay.
You probably just answered it right when we were doing it.
Yeah, okay,
let me ask
you. Just in case. So you would go, I mean, you could certainly take like a chart from Excel, because that's an object. You could take information from an Excel document, copy and paste it into Word, and it's going to format as a table. There's a lot of ways of moving information from one program to another. And like I said, Word's version of Excel is tables. So if you were to take, and I'll just do it real quick here. I'm testing my computer's ability to handle all these open windows here. But let's just say I had some information here. And I'll do this. And I'll just create a few things. If I were to copy this, and then I were to go into Word and paste it, what it's done is it's created a table. Now, the reason I know it's a table is I have the Design and Layout tab. You'll notice, though, that I don't have grid lines. The reason I don't have grid lines is I didn't have the View Grid Lines option open. So in answer to that, yes, there's several different ways to do this. I would recommend, however, if it's a living document, meaning that you might adjust it at some point, that you might want to put it in as a actual Excel spreadsheet. There are other options, and this might be more towards the question, what if it was a workbook that you have previously saved? Yes, there are ways of doing that. It's a little bit more involved. You're inserting a file within it, but it is possible. All right.
Can you take one more, Art?
Yes, I can take one more.
Okay, the question is the table size set by the border margins? Can it exceed the page like Excel? And how is it justified to fit the page?
So yeah, it's within, you still have to live in the Word world, basically. So we do have, if I click out of here, I do have the margins here. Once you click within a table, you still have the ability to make it bigger than those margins, but will it print or not? I don't know. It depends. You might get something like this, the document exceeds the page margin's ability to print, or some similar term that will pop up. Yes, you can go outside the margins and it will print up to a point. All right. So next up, once I remove all of my things here, we're going to talk about first default tabs, and then we're going to talk about custom tabs. And it's important to understand both. So default tabs are normally set every ½ an inch on the ruler. They're what happens when you hit the tab key. If you don't tell the computer anything else and you hit the tab key, it will take your insertion point where you're clicked and it'll move to the next ½ an inch. Now note I didn't say it went over ½ an inch because that's not what happened. It went to the next ½ an inch. So if you were at, let's say, a ¼ inch on your ruler and you hit the tab key, it's going to go to a ½ an inch. If you hit the tab key again, it'll go to 1 inch because that's the next ½ an inch. It's very helpful for lining things up. It's always better than spacing. Spacing is something I would hope we're all working towards not ever doing again. Meaning that if I were to do something like this, I wanted everything to line up like A, and then I wanted something to line up at 1 inch. I could space that over. Hurts me to do this, by the way. Or I could do A and type in that letter. Now I did this, looks like I did the same exact thing here, but I did it 2 different ways. One way is I spaced over about 30 times to get to 1 inch. The other was I hit the tab key twice to get to that 1 inch. First time I hit it, it went to ½ an inch on the ruler. Second time I hit it, it went to the next ½ inch, which is 1 inch. Default tabs are very handy for just a quick fix. We use them for some things. I don't use them for much anymore since I've gotten comfortable with something called custom tabs. And that's what we're going to talk about mostly today is custom tabs. So custom tabs you can set anywhere on the ruler. And once they're set, you still have to strike the tab key to get to them. I mean, you could set all the custom tabs you want. They're not going to do anything until you hit the tab key. So when you hit the tab key, what the computer actually does is it looks for the first custom tab. If there isn't one on the ruler, it goes to the default tab, which I just said, where every ½ an inch. There's many different alignment options within these tabs. So you could have a left custom tab, a right custom tab, a centering custom tab, and even something called a decimal tab that you could put in there. And I'll show you a demonstration on how that works. They're a better option in most cases than default tabs because they require less keystrokes. And they're a much better option than spacing. It would take you, I think I figured out 188 spaces to get from 0 on your ruler to 6½ inches on your ruler. With a custom tab, it would take you 1 keystroke. So you saved yourself something like 187 keystrokes. I see it in resumes a lot. Once it's printed off, it doesn't matter to an employer. They're looking at your resume. However, it matters to you if you spent 3 hours on your resume or 10 minutes on your resume. And it especially matters when you're editing your resume. And I can't enforce this enough or talk about this enough. Every resume should at least be slightly edited to the needs of the current employer. If you have a well-formatted document, you can do that quickly and easily. If you know it's going to be a nightmare to change something, you're not going to do it. You'll just send out the resume you have, and you won't be competing at the highest level as a job seeker because of this. Maybe I put too much into that, but I'm a big fan of custom tabs. You still need to have the physical tab struck, though. So the custom tabs are located on the far left-hand side of your ruler. It's this little L. It's always been there, by the way. You may have wondered at some point what it was doing there. You do not have to click and drag tabs from here to the ruler. This just says, here's the type of tab that will show up if I click on the bottom half of the ruler. That means these little hash marks in the bottom half. If you click up here, nothing will happen. But if you click on the bottom half, and it's a very small little spot here, having this L show here, that's a left tab, you will get a left tab at this location. So here's the different types I mentioned. This is what a left tab looks like. If I were to click on this left tab, it would actually show now a center tab. If I click it again, it'll show a right tab. And if I click it one more time, it'll show a decimal tab. And I'll demonstrate all 4 of those. There are 3 other items, I'm not going to call them tabs, even though one is named a tab, that will show up also. There's something called a bar tab, which looks like just a line. And then there's the first line indent, which is this part of this hourglass looking thing. And then there's a hanging indent. They're not really tabs. I've never in my life used them. I've used bar tab once or twice. In most cases, bar tabs are just irritating, but they allow you to put a line in between like 2 columns within a tab section. I'll show you an example. More importantly, I'll show you how to get rid of them because on some resumes, people will have a bar tab shown, and it's not something you can easily delete if you don't know what you're looking at. So let's do a quick demonstration here. So if I were to, let's say, I'm going to do Monday, and now I'm going to hit the tab key, because again, you have to have a physical tab in there for this to work. Tuesday, and a tab Wednesday. And I'm going to turn my show hide on so you see what that looks like. You see that I have the arrows in between both of these, all 3 of these days of the week. Now, just so this looks a little easier to follow, I'm going to copy and paste a bunch of these. So now we have what looks like 3 columns of words. If I select all these words, and that's important, when you're working with custom tabs, think of them as sections. Now, if you're creating it right off the top, it's fine. It'll carry the format we're going to create onto the next paragraph and the next paragraph and the next paragraph. However, if you're working with pre-existing text, make sure that you select all of it so that the tabs we insert apply to the entire selection. That's the biggest problem you're going to have with tabs. I guarantee it. If I set a tab right here, that applies to one line, one paragraph. And now I have an inconsistently formatted section, and it's going to be very difficult to work with. So I'm going to back that out. I'm going to select the entire thing here, and I'm going to insert a centering tab at 3 1/4 inches. So I'm going to click on the custom tab here twice, or just once actually, to get to that centering tab. And I'm going to go to 3 1/4 inches and click here. Now, because I already had the default tab or the physical tab struck, it was looking for that custom tab in that selection. Once it found it, it jumps over. Now I still have another one over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this one more time and get a right tab. Now, right tabs are most often lined up on the right margin. So right here. The problem with that is there's something already here. There's something called a right indent on my ruler. So I can't click there. It won't allow me to because there's something already there. So I have to be a little sneaky. I have to start my tab over here, click and hold, and then drag it on top of that right indent. And now I have a well-formatted, consistent area of custom tabs. The cool thing about this is, once you have tabs set up correctly, look what you can do. It's like magic. You can move things, and by the way, to move a tab, all you have to do is click and drag horizontally. If you're right on that tab, you can do that. If you want to get rid of a tab, all you have to do is, again, select the entire part that you want to get rid of the tab for, and then put your pointer on it, click, and drag straight down. And then it's going to go all over the place because now it has that first tab that it jumped to, and then it had another tab which brought it to another line. Don't worry, when you're trying to work with tabs, if you just put another one in there, it'll jump right back. It'll jump right back to a well-formatted situation. Now I'm going to go through here. By the way, there is no easy way of, you can't go backwards. You have to kind of go through the whole cycle of tabs, left, right, center. And sometimes, and I've never figured this out, sometimes it skips over certain tabs, and so you have to go through it twice. So you just keep clicking until you get to the tab you want. Okay. Any questions about those before I do a little demonstration on decimal tabs?
Yeah, Science, this is a great question. It says, when you said to edit the resume to meet the needs of the employer, was there something tab specific, or was it a side note for things like objective, etc.? Just curious if different tab settings are more suited to all resume screeners.
Okay, so no. What I'm saying is, although I'll show you a tab setting that you should use for every one of your resumes, what I'm saying is if your resume is difficult to edit because it's improperly formatted, I have seen people just don't do it. And because they don't do it, it's not meeting the needs of the specific employer because they haven't changed their resume or their marketing piece to reflect the audience. So if you have a well-formatted resume with tabs and indents and alignments and all that kind of stuff, you're more likely to change it every time, slightly. You're not recreating it. You're just slightly adapting it. So speaking of that, one of the most common uses in a resume for a tabbed situation would be your dates of employment. And this makes it very, very simple. So let's say that I worked at Mack Truck. And I worked there from 2008 through 2010. What I would do is I would choose the right tab on the tab grouping here. I would put it on that right margin. I would tab to it. And then I would be able to get it perfectly lined up. Little things like that do matter on a resume because what happens, what I see a lot, if people are spacing or they're using default tabs or whatever, they will get situations in which it's just ever so slightly off. And Gloria, I'm sure you've seen this when you're looking at people's resumes.
Yes.
Now, does that mean you have any less skills as a Mack Truck worker? Absolutely not. But it does mean that it looks different from other more well-formatted resumes. So take the time to get it the best you can. Here's a really cool option though, and this will change how you work with resumes. I've mentioned it before with bullets, but tab settings are paragraph-wide formats. They apply to an entire paragraph. So if I have one good setting, like I like this one right here, all I have to do is click on Format Painter in the clipboard grouping. I'm going to double click on it, and double clicking just means it doesn't turn off as easily. And then I click on this one, and I click on this one, and boom, they all snap into line. Now, of course, I was formatting it as well as I could to achieve that. One of the things I see a lot on resumes is what people will do is, because it didn't go to the right setting, they'll hit like tab a couple times, and you'll have multiple tabs, and they'll have multiple tab settings up here, and so they have to tab to it multiple times to get to. So sometimes you have to get rid of, in fact you should, if you're going from one location to another location with nothing in between, there should only be one tab, one physical tab, which looks like an arrow in between those two. If you're not doing that, then you're going to run into problems. So again, I know I'm clicking really fast here. I will give you a link to a specific exercise and video and everything about custom tabs at the end of this. Really important that you try them, play around with them before you have to use them, because if they're used improperly in your resume, they actually cause more problems than they solve. But once they're done right, it's a wonderful thing. Okay. So,
I do have somebody asking Art, they said, why can I see Art but not what he's doing on the tabs? Do you need to change your view or something?
So is everyone, or just some people at least, are you seeing my Word document? You just put in the chat box. Are you seeing the Word document? Okay. So what it might be is it's probably something outside of my control from this side. I will mention, however, if you want to listen along and if you're not seeing everything that I'm supposedly showing you, I will send everyone a video recording of this presentation. Hang in there. It's not something we can probably work through while we're doing this, but you will get the full presentation video at the end of, probably by the end of the day tomorrow. Okay, let's talk about the very specific uses of a decimal tab. Okay, as you can imagine, decimal tabs are all about numbers. And so if I set a decimal tab, it looks like a center tab with a little dot in it. And I know that's really small. I'll increase this a little bit, but it won't increase the ruler. What it does is when I tab to it, it acts like a right tab. It pushes things from the right to the left until I put a decimal in, and then it acts like a left tab. So again, if I started with a decimal, or I didn't have a decimal at all, it's going to look like this. Now the reason for this is something we should always use, and that's decimal alignment. Even if you're not requiring someone to add something up, it would be impossible, not impossible, it would be very difficult to add these things up if it looked like that. Can you imagine trying to add those up? Okay, if I just put a quick decimal tab in there, boom, I can add them up by dropping down the numbers. It just looks better format-wise. Now, it's very seldom you're going to have it anywhere near looking like this. However, if you're working with anything beyond 2 decimal places, I would recommend using a decimal tab. Notice I didn't say if you're working with decimals, and here's why. Most of the time when we work with decimals, it's for monetary reasons. So it's usually going to be something like that, okay? You're always going to have 2 decimal places. And I'm not saying you can't use a decimal tab for that, but if you're always at 2 decimal places, you could still use a right tab, and that would work just as well. And then you wouldn't have to space two things over to see where it lines up. So I don't know if I explained that correctly. Watch what I do here. I have a decimal tab lining these up really nice and neatly. If I select those and get rid of that decimal tab, and how you get rid of a tab again is you just drag it slightly off the ruler. Now I'm going to change that to a right tab. Now, this doesn't work unless I have that physical tab still there, and I still do. Now I'm going to place that right tab, let's say at 2 inches, and notice I get the same effect. And the reason is because they have the exact same decimal places. So if I were to move this to a certain area, it's almost easier to line it up with a right tab than a decimal tab. However, decimal tabs have their own purpose. I'm going to talk briefly about a bar tab. It looks like a line. What it does, and let me see here, I'm going to create a new one. If I have like A tab B, and I put a bar tab at here, let's see, no, I got to go through it. And again, sometimes you have to cycle through more times than you would think. What it'll do is every time you hit enter on a paragraph that has a bar tab in it, it puts this line. So what I've seen on, not a whole lot, but what I've seen on some resumes is they'll have just some weird line happening and they can't get rid of it. They try to backspace it out and it doesn't go away. And the reason is all they would have to do is select that, all the paragraphs it is in, and then drag it off, and then it disappears. Not a whole lot of uses for the bar tab, very specific uses, yes, but causes more probably problems than it solves. All right.
Art, I have a quick question that they just want to know, are there any keyboard shortcuts for these tabs?
So I'm a huge, huge believer in keyboard shortcuts. I use keyboard shortcuts more than anyone I know. It's not as relevant here simply because you have to place the tab on the ruler with your pointer. Oh, but there's one. If you need to place a tab at exactly a position and you're not really good at reading a ruler, what you can do is hold the Alt key down, and the Alt key will show you exactly to a 1/100th of an inch where you are lined up on. More importantly, this delimited line here will help you line things up with your tabs. In fact, in many cases, I'm not even using a custom tab. The purpose of me doing that is not for a custom tab. It's so that I can line something up. So I use this line here to line things up like objects, pictures, or whatever. And then once I'm done with it, I just drag it off because I had no intention of putting a custom line. I was just using that to help put things together. So again, the keyboard shortcut is pressing the Alt key and then moving, and then you'll get the measurement, the exact measurement, as opposed to reading a ruler. One other keyboard shortcut that you can use that is really handy with tabs, oops, I didn't mean to do that, is when you're working with tabbed columns. So if I have some tabbed columns here, I didn't need to do that. I'm selecting all these and I'm inserting those custom tabs. So this looks a lot like a table. The problem is I can't select just this line. If I try to select just this line or just this column, notice what happens. I select the whole thing. So one of the keyboard shortcuts you can use again is the same one. You hold the Alt key down and then you can click and drag what's called non-contiguous text. There's a lot of uses for this. I've used it a lot in various different things, and I could cut out basically that information. So the keyboard shortcut there is the Alt key. Overall, Alt gives you a better precision with things. So I've guessed sometimes that I wonder how I would do that because I needed to be more precise about something. And I've tried the Alt key in combination with a mouse click or something else, and it's actually worked. Another thing you can do with the with keyboard shortcuts, I didn't mention it within the tables. When you are tabbing forward on a table, you hit the tab key. If you want to back up, you hit the shift tab and that will go back. And this works with all fields, by the way. So if you're filling out an application online and you have first name, you don't have to click over to last name. You can just hit the tab key. But if you're at last name and realize you need to go back to first name, you can hit shift tab and that'll jump back one field or one cell. Okay? I don't know if that answered your question, but Yeah, exactly. Holding down the Alt key when resizing columns shows the exact column width. Again, it gives you more precision. It's just like the ruler. So with custom tabs, to avoid the frustration, you want to plan out your tabbed area. You want to have a general idea of what it's going to look like. Sometimes they'll have header rows, and you treat them as a different section because you might want those to be centered over some data. So you'd have the header row, that would be its own kind of tab section, and then you would have the rest of it. You can apply tabs before or after you enter data. It doesn't really matter. The only problem is if you do it after, make sure you're selecting all of the data that you're working with. But be aware you have to hit the physical tab for any of this to happen. So I find it probably better to kind of go as create it in the first row, the first line, first paragraph, and then every time you hit enter, it carries forward that same format. Once you're done with it though, if you're done with that format and you're moving on to, let's say, some narrative text or something, I get done with this and I go down to here, then I'm going to drag off these tab settings because they're not going to help me anymore. Okay, and then I would just type my regular stuff. If I now need to go back to this type of tabs up here, it's real simple. All I do is I click on this row, again click on Format Painter, and apply that format to this row. Now I have those same tab settings, and it's going to work for me just as well. Okay, Format Painter is something I highly encourage you to mess around with. If you put your pointer over it, it tells you exactly what it does. I am very sad that more people don't know about Format Painter because it is so helpful, especially with resumes. With your bullets, it allows you to have consistent bullets. With your tab sections, it allows you to have consistent tab sections. It's like cut and paste, except for it works with the formats, not the actual text. All right. It does take practice, but it's well worth the effort. So what happens if you're in a bad situation? So here's a bad situation. I've got a whole bunch of information. I've got some tabs here that I don't want. They're bar tabs. They're not helping me at all. I've got inconsistent tabs throughout this, and I just want to start over. There's a time to do that, by the way, and it's not necessarily going to each and every line and removing all the tabs. That can work, but it's frustrating. A better option is you select all of the tabs or all of the area in which the tabs you want to get rid of exist. And then you go to the paragraph grouping on the Home tab and click the dialog box launcher. And then you go to the Special Tabs setting. So I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to click OK. Or I don't have to click OK, I just click on this, and I get a separate dialog box. Now, in a normal situation, it would show all the different tab stops that are shown in this grouping. But because it's so horrible, I mean, I really went to town on this and put tons of them in there, it doesn't even try. Word doesn't even know how to track them. So all I have to do is say clear all, and then click OK, and then they're all gone. All of the custom tabs are gone. The physical tabs are still there. Then all I have to do is click on the ruler, and I put one at 1.5, and then I think I put one right at 3, and they jump to the correct position. And more importantly, because I did it to the entire selection, it's uniform, it's consistent, and it's going to be very easy to edit. Any more questions about tabs before we move on to mail merge?
Yes. Jerry is asking, how do you set up a T square on a cover letter? You know, so a lot of the cover letters are called a T cover letter. He's wondering, how would you actually set that up?
Oh, there's a couple of different ways to do it. You could do it with tables. You could do it with a bar tab and underline. That's a great question. So let me just show you a couple different methods. So if I wanted to do it with a table, let's say that I had and I wanted to start a T square right here. One option would be I could potentially go to the Home tab. I could use the borders. I can use the borders by themselves, and I could create a horizontal line, and then I could put in a bar tab at, let's say, let's go down here, and I could put a bar tab at, but I've never used a bar tab before, and now I'm going to do it right within the class. And I could use that as an option for potentially a T table. That would work. And then I would just set some custom tabs on both sides of this so that I would put in your needs. Oops, I didn't mean to put that bar tab there, I'm sorry. In this case, I would put a, like that. Again, I'm trying to do this. And then I would put my skills. I could also do as a table. And what I would do is I would insert the table, and then I would selectively take out, I would erase or not show the borders that I don't want to show. So that's one option. There's all sorts of different options. You could also draw in things. That's not something we didn't even talk about. You can insert shapes. Insert all the shapes you want, and these don't work with text. So you're just kind of tabbing past them, and you could create a T-square that way also. Of course, you'd make it bigger. So there's three different options there. All of them are going to require a little messing around until you get it right. The cool thing is, once you get it right, you save that as a T-square template, and then every cover letter you do after that, all you're doing is you're adjusting the text in an already formatted cover letter. One other thing I would like to show you on custom tabs before we get into mail merge is tab leaders. These can be very handy in very, very specific situations. So if you've ever looked at a phone book, you've seen these. If you ever looked at state mail codes, you've seen these. So in this case, what I've done here is I've created the states, and I hope the state codes. And what I'm going to do is select them, and I'm going to use a right tab to separate the two. And if you were to Google this, for whatever reason that jumps out of there, I got to jump this back. No, there we go. If you were to Google state codes, you'd probably see something like this. Also, you see this in a table of contents with numbers and all sorts of different things. The problem is, looking from here to here, you might lose what you were going for. If this were all 50 states, there are, I think, 9 different states that start with the letter M, and you might miss the connection between the two. So to put a tab leader in, it's just a bunch of dots that happen between the last piece of information before the tab and the first information after the tab. All you would do is, again, go to the paragraph grouping, click on the tabs dialog box, and then you would, the most common one is just the dots. And you would set that and click OK. Imagine all the trouble that saved you of putting a whole bunch of dots in place. And then the cool thing is, once I hit enter, I can go to Montana, and once I hit tab, it works. I think that's Missouri, actually, but maybe it's MT, not sure. I apologize if you're from Montana. Iowa's IA, thank you. I knew I was going to do it wrong here. Can you please just repeat what you did with the process of selecting all tabs to remove? Yes, exactly. I can do that from here. If I wanted to remove all the tabs, in this case there's only one, but the process is the same no matter what. I would select the entire section in which I want to remove the tabs. I would go to the paragraph grouping and click on the dialog box launcher. Now remember, certain groupings have the little arrow at the bottom right of them that give you more options that could be fit into the actual tab that you're looking at. So I click on that. I click on the tabs dialog box launcher within that. Anytime you see a dot, dot, dot after a square, that means it's going to launch additional windows, an additional window with more options. Once I have that, all I have to do is click on Clear All. And I click OK, and they're all gone. Yep. I hope that answered your question. Okay, we will move on, there aren't any more, to mail merge. So the mail merge process is all about saving time and, in effect, at work, saving money. I taught the mail merge process to someone who went into a job that at the beginning of every month, the person who had been in the job before would take the invoices and they would handwrite, and there's benefit to handwriting things, but they would handwrite or type out envelopes for the billings for that month, and they would send it out to a couple hundred people. So all day on a Monday, they were doing this very labor-intensive process, and it took 8 hours. When my person who I just trained came into this job, once she set it up correctly, it was done with 1 click, and that saved 8 hours or 7 hours and 59 minutes of every first Monday of the month. Mail merge is all about saving time for repetitive tasks. So it combines 2 documents into a 3rd document. So it takes a form letter or a template, it takes a data source, and then it combines those 2 to create the thing you print off, whether they be labels or letters or emails or directories or whatever. It's just a step-by-step process like everything. This works very much like what we call a wizard. It kind of walks you through it. In fact, there's even a wizard within the wizard. If you've ever installed a software, it'll say, here's an installation wizard. What that means is it's going to baby step you through the process. And that's what mail merge does. It saves a lot of time. It's used for, like I said, labels, form letters, and emails. It takes practice, but once you get the steps down, and if I give you once I give you the training, I highly recommend you take the source data and the form letter and you merge it like 5 or 6 times. Because at the end of that, you'll just be able to do it in your sleep. It's just a number of clicks. And it does kind of make sense. So I'm not going to insult your intelligence by asking what tab you would use for mail merge process, because it is the mailings tab. So once you click on mailings, all you would do on a blank document, you could do this from a pre-existing document, but when you're practicing, I would recommend just playing around with it with a blank document. You click on Start Mail Merge. That makes sense, right? So I'm going to click on Start Mail Merge. And in this case, I'm going to do letters. So I'm going to start a mail merge letter. Say it's a Christmas list I'm going to send out. We've all gotten those, haven't we? Let me know in the chat box. This is just for fun, of course, but have you ever gotten a form letter from a relative that has your first name, like, hello, Art, and then it's this huge, long form letter? No. Oh, yes. Okay, a couple yeses. It's meant to make it look personal. And that's the whole idea of mail merge, is you're taking what we call fields, merge fields, like first name, last name, address, that sort of thing, and you're putting them into the same letter that everyone gets. So it has that idea of personal touch. Also, it can be very important if it has like data that is like a billing. It could have that information that is unique to that individual that you have to pay a certain amount. So what you do is you start with, I'm going to say letters, and then the next step is you're going to select who these letters go out to. Now, in most cases, if you're doing this in a business situation, it's going to either come from an existing list, which could be, well, it's almost always going to come from an existing list, and this could be an Excel spreadsheet. It could be a database. It could even be something called, highly likely to be a query, Q-W-E-R-Y, within a database, meaning that you asked a question of a database. You said, who has overdue bills? And then it ran a report. Well, you saved that report, and you merged the data from that report with a form letter to send out to people who owe you money. You don't want to send it to everybody, because that wouldn't make sense. You'd be saying, you owe me money when they don't. So in this situation, we're going to use it as its most basic. We're going to say we're going to type a new list. So we're going to create the database right within Word. So what this does is it creates this little option here that has the standard fields that you would see for like a mailing. Your title, your first name, last name, company, address lines, that sort of thing. To check to make sure it has everything you need, and that's very important before you start, you want to click and drag that over, or just click on customize columns, and it'll tell you what's there. And if you had to add something like, oh, I don't know, county. County's not there. I would click on add, and then I'd be able to add that field. Okay, so the fields are asked of every single record. So an individual person would be considered a record. Every record is combined with a whole bunch of fields, okay? So I would just click OK on that. And I would enter in some information. Now, for the sake of getting this done in a timely fashion, I pre-entered just some simple information. I've entered in 4 records. And this is a great example of using the tab key. You could go from this one to this one to this one as far as the fields within that record by hitting the tab key. If you need to create a new entry, you can click on New Entry and you would get a new person, or you can tab past the last field in the previous person. Okay, so I've got some information here. One thing I would really stress, consistency. When you're entering information, I'm going to go back one. When I'm entering the state, imagine if you enter the state as capital M, small n for some people, and then capital M-I-N-N for other people, and you spelled it out as Minnesota for others. You're going to run into a real issue that if you try to do a sort on that and you want to send out to just people in Minnesota, you're going to miss out on some people. Also, make sure you differentiate a name into first name and last name. Think about what is the smallest part that I would have to split off from someone's record. So their first name, their last name. Maybe not address. Address would be almost impossible, at least the address line, to split out in like street address, because some things are way or highway or road or box or something like that. So generally that's going to be one field, but you always want to split out everything else. I'll tell you some of the biggest horror stories I've had in data entry is when someone puts the first and last name in a field, and then they later need to split that off. You can actually do that through custom tabs and tables, and it can be done, but not easily and not for most people. So save yourself a lot of headache and enter information correctly the first time. Okay, so I've got this information. Once I've done that, once I click OK, what it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, what do you want to do with this information? Because what I've just created is a database, a very simple database. Most of the time you have to save a database before you enter any information, and I like that better because then it saves as you go. But in this case, you've created the database and now you're going to save it. It's going to save it as a different type of file than a Word file. It's got an MDB file, which is an office address list. Give it a name that you're going to remember. So in this example, I gave it the name Advanced Word Example because that makes a whole lot of sense for what we're doing here today. And then I click on Save. Now that's linked to this form letter. I could go back at a later date, and now I could use the existing list, which would then be what we just created. So now that I have that database, it is an existing list that I could later adapt or reuse. Okay, I went through a bunch of clicks there. Okay, so once you've got that done, you're going to be presented with basically a blank document again. This is the start of your form letter. Okay, now we're actually starting the form letter itself. But if you were paying real close attention, you would have noticed that these icons were dimmed before, but now they're not. Now they're available. So when you create a form letter, it's all about narrative text and fields. So those fields are taken directly from the database we just created. But instead of typing in individual names, we put in variable placeholders. So what that would look like is I would click on Insert Merge Field and First Name, and it puts in this merge field. One of the biggest mistakes people make is they don't put a space between the letters or the words and the field. So always make sure you do that, otherwise they will be kind of scrunched together. Okay, and then you just go through the rest of your document. In this case, we are contacting everyone with the last name of, and I'll put another merge field in there. This time, I'm going to click on the icon for merge field. This isn't a big deal, but there's two different ways you look at this. If you click on the drop down right here, you're going to get a drop down list. If you click on the icon, you're going to get a dialog box. They work a little bit differently, but they do mostly the same thing. So I'm going to click on last name and insert. And then I'm going to close out of that. And now I have a very simple form letter. Okay. Any questions on that before we move on, Glory?
Yes. So they're asking, can you import the information or copy and paste it from another source?
If you're going to copy and paste it, use the original source. Don't try to make it more difficult. You can use all sorts of different data from existing lists. In fact, let me just do this. If I were to go to, and again, I'm stuck with the menu on the top here. Let me just get it to mailings. And if I went to start letters, and I'm doing this in a live Word document now, and I went to select recipients and use an existing list, it's going to look for all data sources. Look how many different extensions there are there. I hope you can see that. Can you see a whole bunch there, Glory?
Yes, I sure can.
Yeah, so it'll work with Excel documents, Access documents, HTML files, Word documents, all sorts of different things. And if I choose, like I just did, Advanced Example MDB, which is what I created, now I can edit that recipient list, and there's that information I just created. John Smith, Ellen Travers, Grant Johnson, Letitia Ahrens. Okay, so once it exists, you can pull it back. However, don't frustrate yourself by doing too much work. If it exists in an Excel document, it'll work just fine. Just play around with it a little bit. Do it on a small scale to make sure that you're entering it into an acceptable format, and always use header rows, because it will understand header rows and it will create merge field based off those header rows. So make sure that if you're entering information, you have a top row, and I would bold them and center them, so I don't think I have to do that, but I do, so that Word recognizes them as header rows, and then it creates merge field names for me. You're not stuck with just boring old last name, first name. Okay.
I have one more question too. It says, when you say clear all, is it only for the highlighted areas?
Yes, exactly. And thank you for reinforcing my point, because that's if you're referring back to the custom tabs. Yes, if you want to clear them, it's only going to work in the area you select. And of course, many people just, they just go to it without selecting anything, which means that it will apply to the paragraph your insertion point is in. So it'll only really happen to one line or one paragraph within the entire document. Okay, let's go back here. Now, okay, so I've got a database, the Advanced Word database. I've got the form ladder. In this case, it's called Document 1. I could save this right now if I wanted to, but just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to leave it. Now what I need to do is merge these into a third document. Now, I usually just merge it, but you can preview the results just to make sure it's doing what you expect it to do. So there is a preview results option right up here. And what it'll do, if I click on it, it will allow me to then look at, here's the first one, John and Smith, and then I can use these buttons here to go to the next one, and I can make sure, and I like to do that in a different way before I print anything or before I send anything anywhere, just to make sure it works, because this is going to be really obvious here if you forgot to space in between anything, because you'll get a squiggly line, or if you miss something, you can kind of scan through one of the documents. Now, this is only going to do one of these at a time. When you, oh, I did, okay, and I'm going to jump back here. I clicked off preview to get back here. If I do it as a whole, it's going to do something different, and that's finish and merge. So if I click on finish and merge, what I'm doing now is taking those two documents and creating a third document. So I'm going to click on that. And one thing you don't want to do, first go around, is click on print documents. Because if I miss something and I didn't preview it, I could potentially print off thousands of documents that all have the same error. And the reason for that is the error was in the form letter, and it's going to be repeated each and every time. So make sure your form letter is absolutely perfect before you print anything. And a great way of doing that, in addition to the preview results, is you click on Edit Individual Documents. Once you do that, it's going to say, what do you want to edit? In most cases, I do all, but you could do current, record, or from a certain point to a certain point. That, to me, doesn't make any sense. If you made a mistake, it's going to be in every single one of them. So I'm going to click OK. on all. By the way, someone can type fast enough. Does anyone know what these are called? They're not checkboxes. A circle with a dot. Does anyone know what those are called? Radio buttons. Oh, good job, Steve. Yes, they're called radio buttons. And the significance of a radio button is in any grouping of radio buttons, only one can be selected at a time. I could select multiple ones. In checkboxes, you can sometimes do that. They kind of have their own rules baked into whatever situation they're in. So sometimes one will cancel out another. But with radio buttons, it's very specific, meaning that if I click on one of these, it will deselect the other. So I'm just going to do all and click OK. And two things of note once you do this. From old-time radios. That's funny. I'm a huge old-time radio fan. I collect old-time radio programs. I'm so glad to see that in the chat box. All right, I digress. Two things to keep in mind here. The bottom of your status bar, and we define this in the Intro to Word course, is now going to say that there's one of 4 pages. What happens when you create a third document from your form letter in your database is it will create as many pages or as many sections as there are records. So if I have a 5-page form letter and I have 4 records, it's going to create 20 pages because it's going to be 4 pages or 5 pages for each of the 4 records. And it will put a page break in between each of those. And so then what you can do is you can scroll through and see if everything's consistent. If you have any of those red squiggly lines, and you see that this is a third document, it's called letters 1. So it's not the form letter, it's another letter. So here's a mistake a lot of people make. They will see an error on the merged document, the letters 1 document, and they will go in there and they will fix it. That doesn't do you any good because you're going to have to fix that each and every record. You're going to have to scroll through literally maybe hundreds of pages to fix it each time. Save yourself the hassle. All you have to do is close out of this. And don't worry, this is the one time where I'm going to say you don't have to save. It's not going to hurt anything because beneath this merge document is the form letter. It's still there. Okay? I would fix the issue on the form letter and then I would re-merge it. And then it would fix it on all up to 100, well, however many records you have, it would fix it on all of them. Hope that makes sense. So again, with mail merge, what you're doing is you are creating a form letter. You are either defining where you're taking the information from or you're creating information in something called a database. You're merging those two things together to create a third document, which then you could print off and send to clients. Of course, other options on this would be creating mailing labels. That's another very obvious one that is used. I've never personally used this, but you could also do it through an email. Like instead of everyone getting the same invitation from me, I could pretend that I wrote every one of you a personal email by creating a form letter email template and then inserting your first name into a field there. I'm sorry I didn't do that for you. It's not that I don't care. It's just that it's a little time intensive to do that. I send it everyone as a blind copy. All right, any questions about mail merge before we move on?
So the red dot means there is an error?
Yeah, so let me show you what that would look like. Not a red dot, a red squiggly. So if I had something that looked like this and it said, Dear Amy, I would get a red squiggly. And the reason for that is when I had inserted this initially, what I had done, and I'm just going to fake this. When I had inserted that merge field, I hadn't put a space between the words and the merge field. So all I would do is I would close out of that merge document and I would click in the form letter and just put a space. And that would fix it for all instances in the merged document. It would fix it for all of them. The mistake I see people make is they go to the merge document and they say, well, I got to fix that. So I got to fix it there. And then I got to fix it in the next one and the next one and the next one. Don't cause yourself that hassle. Fix it in the form letter. You only have to fix it once. All right. I do have a couple of little tidbits that we may or may not get to, but I'm going to get through the rest of this, and then I will open it up for questions in the 15 to 14 minutes we have left here. As with all of this training that I've been doing over the last 5 weeks, and by the way, Advanced Excel is now live on the virtual and interactive site. In fact, I can give you, here is the link to register for that if you're interested. I'm not trying to push this on to anyone if they don't want it, but I got ahead of myself a little bit and I actually got the class created and on the site. You can register for that now. None of this is going to do you any good beyond, oh, that was interesting and oh, cool, if you don't practice this. So as I say with every one of these webinars I've been doing, please go to Google, type in GCF Word 2016 or whatever version you have, and click on the first link you're going to get, and then go through the sections. Because this is more advanced, I'm hoping you've already went through the basics, but there are specific sections on mail merge that will give you source data files, will give you a form letter. You edit the form letter, maybe you edit a little bit of the source data, and then you merge something that has maybe hundreds of records. So it'll seem a little bit more realistic than the quick example I gave. It's the same exact process. It's just going to be a little more voluminous. I've also included the direct links to everything we talked about today. The tab section also includes indents. The table section is an all-day thing if you want to engage in. It's great information. And then the ability to go through mail merge on your own pace. Again, I highly recommend you go through those. Once you've gone through those, you'll find that the testing on North Star Digital Literacy is something you've surpassed now. And they're not going to ask you some of these more advanced things, and that's kind of a good feeling because this is what a lot of employers look at for, proficiency. And if you can do above and beyond what some of the common tests are, that should be a good feeling going into an interview or in writing your resume or in documenting or talking about your skills. So this is the North Star Digital Literacy Assessment that you can take online that will tell you about where you're at with various Microsoft Office products, including Word and Excel. At this time, I will open it up to any other questions anyone might have.
Okay, so I have a question that says, can I get a copy of the Intro to Word sent to me?
Sure. If that person could send me their, send Glory your email address in the chat. You can do it privately, and then I will send that to you.
Then the next one is, will you be adding these links in the follow-up email that you send them?
They're already in there.
Perfect. Are you ready for another question, Art?
Go ahead.
Okay. Is there a way to select a tabbed column?
Yeah,
you showed that, but can you?
I'll show it again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's columns, there's table columns, and there's tabbed columns. And so in this instance here, if I were doing something like this, and I have, so there's 3 columns here. They're tabbed columns, and the reason I know that is I turn my show hide on and I see a tab in between each one. If this were a table, it would be very simple to select it. I would just put my pointer on the top of it, I would click, it would select the entire column. But because this is a tab and these are actually just paragraphs, it's not easy to do. I try to select and it doesn't work. So that's the example I give where I hold the Alt key down and then I can select basically that column. And then I can do all sorts of things to it. I can bold it, underline it. By the way, I use this is part of the exact process I use to separate a first name and a last name. If someone puts first and last name in a field, like name, instead of putting first and last name as separate fields, this is part of the process for doing that. I change the space into a tab, and then I select that column, and I reverse them. There's a few steps to that, but this would be one of the use cases for that. Okay, So how to get to the mail merge again? And again, I know this is going through pretty fast. So to get to mail merge, I just saw this question pop up. All you need to do is go to mailings on the ribbon. So mailings is one of the tabs on the ribbons that's all about mail merge. So I click on that, and then there's a couple of different ways to do this, but I'm just going to click on Start Mail Merge. That's how you get into it. It's the Mailings tab, and then on the Start Mail Merge grouping, you click it, and then you start with letters. Once you've done that, you need to select the recipients you want the letters to go to, and you click on, in this case, I could use an existing list, and then I would choose whatever that happened to be. So because I already created that list and saved it, I could choose that list and open it. Whatever's in that list is now going to be my merge field options. So if this were something I created in Excel and it had a header row, those are what are going to show up here. So they can be whatever you want them to be. You know, if I were doing a bird list for some reason, I have no idea. I always try to get birds into my workshop. They could be passerines or gulls or whatever, and I could choose that option, and that would pop up as my merge field. And then once you're done, you finish and merge and edit individual documents to make sure everything is doing what it should. It's working the way you anticipated it to work. And then from that point, you could print it, you could save it, you could do whatever we want with it.
Excellent. I have a question from Flora, and what she's asking is, do you know how and why, if in LibreOffice, I have a difficult time doing the exercise in Excel? When I download the practice for each session in Excel, I am getting LibreOffice. I will wait for this question to be answered at the end.
Okay. So whatever your default program is for spreadsheets is what it's going to open in. So if you have Excel open, or if you have Excel on your, let's see here. Let's see if I want to do this. I'm going to minimize this. I'll get rid of that. So, okay. So here's a, I have an Excel. I have an Excel document right here. If I right click on this, I know it's an Excel document because it has the Excel icon on it. If it has the Libre icon, and that means it's hijacked that extension. Now, if you have Excel, you of course want it to open up in Excel. I have Libre installed and I have Excel installed on multiple machines. So what I would do is I would right click on that file and I would go to Open With, and then it will give me different options. So LibreOffice should show up on there, or I could choose another app and I could actually locate it. The other thing you can do is you can open up Excel and drag that file in, or open it from Excel, basically. So what I would do is I would open up Excel, I would go to File and Open, and if I go to that actual file, then I'm guaranteed it's going to open within Excel. Now, if you're opening an Excel document that you download from GCF, it's never going to open in Excel if you don't have Excel installed on your computer. The other option you have there is you could potentially open up the web-based version of Excel through a Windows Live account, and then you would have a similar look and feel at least. Okay. Any other questions, Glory?
Yes. Does ATS properly scan a resume created in template with tables?
Yes. Now, that's a blanket statement because there are literally hundreds of applicant tracking softwares around. And in the past, you would hear someone say, oh, you got to make it a plain text document. You got to make it as simple as possible. Make it a rich text format or whatever. I'm not saying that wasn't true at one point, and I'm not even saying it's not true in certain situations. A quick kind of, if it's a larger company, they're going to be able to read templates because the vast majority of resumes they get will likely be in a template. The one thing you want to stay away from, which looks a lot like a table, is something called a text box. Okay, so a text box, you'd still go to Insert, but instead of table, you would go to text box and maybe draw in a text box. That looks like a table, looks like a field. This is the one that I'd be a little cautious about. because sometimes ATS systems, applicant tracking systems, will not properly look at information in a text box, but in a table it should be just fine.
Excellent. If you have a list of skills that you want to be put in a table, how do you add bullets for each skill?
The same you would be, now just because you're in a table, remember each one of those table cells is kind of like its own little document. I probably shouldn't have gone that big. Let's go to insert tables. Let's do this. So if I have this here, and maybe I have it this big here, I can go right back to the Home tab, go to Bullets, type my information in. As I hit Enter, I get, that's the beauty of tables, is now I've got this really nice thing over here, which I can go over there, and I can create a 2-column bulleted list, which is not easy. Well, there's a lot of different ways to do it. This is the easiest way. So yes, that's what you would do. You would do it right within the cell itself, and every time you hit Enter, you'll get a new bullet.
Here's a good one. It says, what if records from an existing document aren't set up in a format that works with your mail merging document?
Then what you could do is you could copy and paste it into Excel and make it the right format. You know, copy and paste is not specific to Microsoft Office or any one program. It's a Windows option. So I can take any information that I can click and drag over in a Windows environment or even elsewhere. I can copy that. I can paste it into an acceptable program or format and do a quick couple edits to make it acceptable. Yeah, you know, once data is entered, it should never have to be re-entered. Sometimes, if it's just a small thing, it is easier to re-enter, but in most cases, it's better to adjust that information through, you know, editing or reformatting than it would be to re-enter.
Nice. Thank you, Art. I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
It is, if you make a table and it is the same to delete column dividers than to make it a header? Should I read that again?
Yeah, let me
If you
see.
make a table,
Okay, I've got a table.
Yep, is it the same to delete column dividers than to make a header?
Well, this would be a column divider. A header is just one cell at the top of each column. Okay, so in Excel or in a Word table format, I would have my header at the top. I don't have to delete anything. I may have to change the alignment. If it's just strictly for visual purposes, one of the things that questions I often get is, what are these starburst things? In tables, each cell has an alignment non-printing character for whatever reason. I'm never able to figure this out, other than it will kind of show you what the alignments are in a given cell. So usually the header is going to be something where you're going to maybe right align it, and then in the cell you may align it differently. There's nothing magical about the header row that you have to adjust things. I don't know if I answered that correctly, so maybe that person could contact me in the follow-up, and I'll explain it more thoroughly. That does put us to 2:30. I do have another jump to meeting. Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate people showing up for these because I'm very passionate about this. I really like this stuff. I'm glad to see some other people like it too. We're going to go crazy next week with advanced Excel. We're going to talk about functions, some more complex formulas, but don't be scared off. They're not that complex. And we will talk a little bit about pivot tables also. Like I said, I will give you the follow-up information for this class by the end of the day tomorrow. I'm sure I can get the video edited and out to you in that time. But again, the challenge is always there. Go to GCF, go through the quizzes, go through the assignments. If you can do them a couple of times on your own, you got it. And then figure out a reason, a method to keep these skills up. Put Word and Excel into your daily life and things you like to do, and then you'll keep those skills fresh. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.